When we obsess over those fruits, the action, the work itself suffers, and so does the rest of our community. We are back with another reflection on the daily Vedantic. And today's episode is continuation of one recently where I talked about the two primary lessons from the Bhagavad Gita, the world's most famous poem. 25-year-old text, 2,500-year-old text that is a 30-minute read. It's a dialogue between this warrior prince, Arjuna, and his charioteer, or who he thinks is his charioteer and childhood friend, Krishna. His charioteer turns out being a symbolic embodiment of God, and it's this really kick-ass conversation between this warrior prince right before this massive battle of this great civil war, who's sitting right in the middle of the battlefield, acting like he's surveying both sides, but really just trying to find peace and stillness in the midst of melting down. And in the middle of this battlefield has this conversation with his charioteer that you could read in, like I said, about 30 minutes. The commentaries that are out there that might take you a couple hours to read, but the actual dialogue is, it's a 700 verse poem. It's quite paradoxical, cryptic, much like the Upanishads that might be 13 verses or 80 verses. This is paradoxical and kind of throws you around as you read it. You're like, wait, it just said the exact opposite 5 lines prior. And now it's saying this. And it's because the transformative texts throughout history, they aren't transformative unless they don't quite fit in your current mind. You have to stretch the mind for it to make sense. And then when it does, as they say about the mind, once stretched in new dimensions, once stretched by new ideas, cannot go back to its old dimensions. So it stretches the mind for sure. But the two primary lessons, practical lessons from the Gita. The first, which a few episodes ago, I touched on. The first is, I am not the doer. You are not the doer. And this concept of I am the doer, that's where we get ego, separation from those around us, or shame, or resentment from those around us. And this text tells us we are not the doer. You are not the doer. Cultivating a sense of doership, of being the doer. I'm the one that's building this company, that's raising these kids, that's maintaining this relationship. That's a recipe for destruction. The other primary lesson from the Gita, practical lesson, because ultimately the Gita comes down to who you really are. Your nature, between the words Dharma and Mama. The first and last words of the Gita is the true essence of the Gita's who you are. But that might not be that practical because of what it says you are in your practical day-to-day living. So the practical lessons, the day-to-day living that you can apply right now, today, in a work meeting in 3 hours is, okay, I'm not the one driving this business. It's a cultivation of 1,000 people's efforts, cultivation of untold. I mean, if you're using a computer, who knows how many people, how many profound efforts from innumerable people had to go into creating that device that you might be using to power your solo freelancing gig. Still, it's not just you doing the work. But if you work in a company with a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, then certainly not the case that you are the doer. And yet, as a sidebar, it is so tempting to think we are the doer. But the other practical lesson that I didn't touch on in that previous episode is that this text, this philosophy, Vedantic philosophy, tells us that the fruit of our actions is not ours. The fruit of your actions. You are not the doer, and the fruits that come to you from your actions, they're not yours. Those fruits might come to you, but they are for everyone around you, in service of you, your family, your community, your state, your region, your country, all humanity. As you increase that ring of identification from beyond yourself to beyond your household to beyond your neighborhood, as you increase that to, like I said, state, region, country, all humanity, all living beings, you start to lose this grip on, okay, those fruits, that money I earned, that name, that status, that recognition. You start to lose that grip, and you start to recognize, with a cultivation of this concept of this principle, the use of the intellect that jumps in front of the mind, being like, yes, mine. This is going to be so great to have all of these fruits. The intellect jumps in and says, whoa, my right is to the action. I get to do that work. After all, there was work in paradise before the fall of man. And the symbolic story of Genesis, there was work that Adam did well before, and Eve, well before the fall. And we'll come back to Genesis in a second because it's quite relevant. But the fruits of that work, they're not ours. They are for the benefit of everyone around us. And we're always pushed to increase what we mean by around us, to go further and further. The fruits are not ours. And when we get caught up thinking the fruits are ours, not only does that separate us from our community, but it'll actually undercut your effort, your action for future fruits. We all know the experience when you get so caught up in the results. This is what I'm going to get. Oh, I can't wait to get that. This is going to be so great when X, Y, or Z happen in my life. Can't wait for the fruits, the rewards, the spoils to come my way from whatever I'm doing. And it seems innocent enough to think about that. How great it would be to win a championship in your high school basketball league. How great it would be to graduate at the top of your class, or if you could get that job, if you can get that promotion, if you could make that amount of income, if you could ... fill in the blanks with the fruits of our work. And then that thought flow starts to grow. Start to think, oh, yeah, that would be awesome. Oh, I can't wait for that. That feels like that should happen. And it takes us out of the present moment of the work before us and takes us into this future tense of, oh yeah, that'll be awesome down the road. As they say, it takes us from process orientation to results orientation. Instead of obsessing over the process, the work, getting better and better, mastering that craft, whether it's basketball or that job where you just don't even realize you just keep getting promotion after promotion because you've mastered the process. Instead, the alternative, the antithetical to mastering a craft is obsessing over the results, trying to artificially engineer the results because we're so caught up in that end state, that result orientation instead of the here, the now, the work before us. The Vedantic symbolism of the fall of man, the fall of our intellect, is that in Genesis, they're eating from the tree of knowledge. They're eating the fruit. That knowledge exists, but the fruit is not theirs. The work exists, but the fruit is not theirs. And if you're interested in opening up the Bhagavad Gita and reading it, highly recommend the Swami Parthasarathi version of the Gita. His commentary is not only his English translation, just second to none, but the commentary in plain English, outlining and walking through the seemingly irreconcilable paradoxes, walking a total beginner through them, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, that actually makes sense. In addition to those things, it also underscores and highlights these two eternal principles, that you are not the doer. The fruits of your action, they are not yours. And when we consume those fruits, obsess over those fruits, the action, the work itself suffers, and so does the rest of our community. That is today's reflection on the Daily Vedantic. If you want more reflections on the Bhagavad Gita, we did a 20-part series on the world's most famous poem earlier in this podcast project that you can go check out. So with that, we'll end it there. This has been another reflection on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time.